Okay, so this, you guys, is showing um, just the impact of or reward center in our brain. Uh, so in this experiment, this little guy has got a stimulating electrode um, implanted inside of his head that is directly stimulating his part of his hypothalamus. He goes over and presses this lever here, and then it sends a electrical stimulation right into his hypothalamus. So basically, it's like he just took a hit of cocaine, so to speak. Now, what Olds and Milner is showing in this experiment is just this part of the flooring is electrified. And they actually made this part even big enough so that, if you can imagine, three rats standing next to each other. And one starts walking across, gets electrocuted, and dies. Trying to get over here to press this lever again to get that stimulation. But that is just showing what happens to the addicted brain when it has become addicted. It doesn't care anymore. It's going to do what it thinks it needs to do, even if it potentially means killing itself. Our amygdala is part of our limbic system that helps us regulate the emotions of fear and anger. Fear and anger are two evolutionary emotions that have believed to be very important for our survival. Being able to defend yourself, being able to be assertive, and attack someone if they are attacking you. An interesting study or case study, so to speak, is Charles Whitman. He uh, went on a shooting spree. He ended up um, killing 16 people, wounding twice as much as that, and then he was gunned down. And it was found in his autopsy that this guy, um, it was shown in his autopsy that he had tumors on top of his amygdala. So his amygdalas were compromised, meaning that they weren't functioning the way that they should have been. And so in your assignment, I'm going to ask you guys, um, so this happened, decades ago. Well, Charles Whitman. So, let's say, for example, then this were to happen today. Um, if you were the jury or the judge in charge of this, and let's say Charles Whitman wasn't killed, but brought into court, and we find that he has, these two golf ball sized tumors on top of his amygdala. They're removed, and then he goes back to acting normal. Well, what would you do if you were the judge? Would you still sentence him to, life in prison, the death sentence, or what? Because think about it this way: if it was you and you weren't acting yourself, how would you want to be treated in the legal court system if something like this happened? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just ethics in biology. So that's the old brain, limbic system. This is then going to break down the different lobes of what is known as our new brain, the cortex. And basically, our different lobes have specific different functions. Our frontal lobe is what allows us to be us, so to speak, our higher personality traits, logical thinking, memory, etc. Our parietal lobe, this is going to help us with our bodily sensation, of touch, pain, etc. Our temporal lobe, this is involved with hearing, and other parts of vision. And our occipital lobe in the far back is primarily used for vision. I'll come back to Broca's and Wernicke's in a second. What this is breaking down for you guys is basically if we were to take a slice of our parietal lobe, um, the caricatures here show how much of the how much tissue of the brain is devoted to these different parts of our body. So, for example, as you can see, when it comes to on the right is input, sensory, on the left, output for motor movement. As you can see, we have a lot of nervous tissue, brain tissue that is devoted to things like, talking, being able to enunciate, move our lips, our tongue to produce words. Our thumb gets almost as much tissue as our entire rest of our hand. Like if you ever want to know how important your thumb is, try duct taping it to the inside of your palm like that, and then seeing how well you can manage without your thumb. We don't have as much, for other parts of our body because we just don't need it. This is showing brain tissue size comparison across species. As I said, I've worked with rats. They have everything that we have. We just have more. But the idea is that the more that we have, the more sophisticated our brain, or the more sophisticated our thinking is. Okay, so then with language, basically the simple breakdown is Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Aphasia is where we lose function of language. It's a question of at what point. So this breaks down like how when we read or hear someone speak, Wernicke's area is what allows us to interpret, like when we're listening to someone speak. We can understand what they are saying. Wernicke's is the understanding part. Broca's area, on the other hand, is our ability to produce language, to make our own. Now, think about it then. If your Wernicke's area is damaged, you can't comprehend language, but you can produce it. That's kind of paradoxical. If Broca's area is damaged, you can't produce language, but you can understand it. But that would mean then that you would have, how would you let someone know that you do or do not understand them? So it's very tricky. But basically, Broca's produces language, Wernicke's is where it understands. The last thing then I'll mention to you guys is with our frontal lobe being, a part of our ability to plan things, our personality, emotionally regulate ourselves, etc. I'll mention this guy Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage, he was alive in the late, I believe, the early 1900s, and basically he was working on the railroad system, and he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and basically some explosive pre-detonated or went off when it shouldn't have, and it sent this piece of railroad straight up behind, up through his cheekbone, behind his eye, then up through his head, and it took out a good amount of his frontal lobe. And he survived it. It didn't kill him. But as time went on, it became apparent that his personality was different. He was quick to anger, became easily frustrated, and the people who knew him said that this is not him. But Phineas Gage then is a case study of showing the connection of a specific part of our brain associated to a specific part of mental function. So that's kind of cool. No, I guess the last thing then I'll mention talk to you guys about is neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the generation of new cells. This does happen in our brain. It's slows down throughout life. Only certain areas can do it throughout life. But neuroplasticity is something that can happen all throughout life, where basically our cells can change their connections, change the strength of connections. They can become weaker, etc. As memories fade or strengthen, that sort of a thing. But basically, it's like, you have Play-Doh, and you can reshape the same piece of Play-Doh into different things. That's the same idea with our brain. Throughout our life, experiences change us, but it's it's an interesting phenomenon. And then we have two hemispheres of our brain. If you close your fist, that's roughly about the size of one hemisphere. Close both your fists, that's roughly the size of your brain in total. So with hemispheres, since we have two hemispheres, we actually in a way have two brains working together. The corpus callosum is the structure that links our two halves together, so that the two computers, so to speak, can have a dialogue. And lateralization just speaks to the idea that one hemisphere may be more predominant in a specific function than another. Language is believed to be more left hemisphere based. Being analytical is more right. It's not universal, but there are just data that show that sort of thing. So yeah, that is where I will end it there. The next stuff, you guys, is just breaking down this lateralization idea. I'm not going to hold you to that specifically in the test, but I just wanted, you can see that. I will mention this, split brain. So I did mention the corpus callosum being what links the two hemispheres together. Well, there are instances where, for example, when somebody has severe epilepsy, epilepsy is just reoccurring seizures. And when a person has a seizure, it starts off in a localized part of our head in our brain, and then it starts to spread throughout our brain. Once the seizure has spread to the point where it crosses the corpus callosum, and like let's say it started in the right hemisphere, but now the left hemisphere becomes involved and becomes way too hyperactive in a seizure, just way too much activity, that's when a person passes out and is at risk for hurting themselves or dying. So if somebody has epilepsy, like a case study of a kid who was experiencing like 900 seizures a day. Like, think about that. That's like, every minute of his waking day, he's having a seizure. As a last resort effort, what people do is cut the corpus callosum so that the activity is not able to travel from one hemisphere to the other. But what you end up having then is someone where the hemispheres are not having as much success having a dialogue between them because the main highway has been cut. So it's just interesting, cool stuff. And biofeedback is a procedure where we can learn to regulate our physiological things like blood pressure, heart rate, just by being mindful of them, kind of a thing. So yeah, that is that is on the biology and behavior, you guys. There is a assignment there for you in there as well. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a good rest of your day.